Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I'm going to be discussing the Terminators rule reveal. One big thing to mention here, we don't even know the rules entirely for 10th edition, so a lot of this we are not getting fully within context yet, but it does give us a strong idea of what is to come, and there are some very interesting points to discuss. First thing to look at is the datasheet. So there was a number of things that were interesting here. We got to see the stats, we got to see some of the weapons, we got to see some special rules, so a lot to look at. Now the big takeaways, we'll start with the stat line, is that Terminators now be toughness 5 and they have a 4-up invul save. Now I feel that's really good, especially the toughness 5, for the sheer fact that it means small arms fire will have a harder time really causing wounds against them. Now they already were having a hard time with 2-up armor save, but this really does cement them as really difficult to bring down. Small arms fire is really going to struggle in that regard. Now the 4-up invul I am a bit tricky on. So I always had a problem with invul saves in some regard. I did a video about damage mitigation, and I said that there was a big disparity between the 2-up save and the 5-up invul, meaning you'd have to be hit by something really high AP for it to have a true effect, and now it is getting that bit closer. But one thing that has been discussed is that they really want to scale back on AP and try and not have it being going into ridiculous amounts, though I'm sure there will be some weapons that do have that. However, you need to be hit by something that's AP -3 to even enter the area where the invulnerable save becomes relevant. Looking at this datasheet here, none of these weapons are AP -3. Now, with Terminators that could just be the case, but it seems like if you're going to be scaling, we've added this extra invul, but we've also scaled back the main thing that was a problem, which was the armor penetration characteristic, and we'll see how it plays out in that one. The 4-up invul is a good thing, but I always felt that when it comes to the difference between the 2-up save and the 5-up invul, is that smaller AP seemed to really be quite big benefit. You could gear around Terminators by firing loads of AP -1, AP -2 or AP -3 in the past, and you just would not enter the invul stage. Now it's going to be AP -1 and AP -2, with AP -3 finally being able to play off and be of benefit. I'm maybe overthinking on that one, but me and David thought about this a lot. I was a big fan of Armor of Contempt. I almost would have said maybe remove the invul save in the past, maybe not with AP not with invul 4, but in the past, if you had the reducing the AP amount, it meant it felt meaningful at all times, rather than when the invul only happened at a certain time, and that's when you're hit by really high armor penetrating weapons. When we don't have many of them left in the game now, we're going to see how that plays out, and I really can't gauge that unless I see all the weapons that are going to have AP -3 and more to really see how it's going to play in effect. It's a good change, and one that I think would have been excellent in the previous edition. This edition, when AP is reducing, it may be something, again I am overthinking, but simple matter of fact, it is an improvement, and one that I think is going to be welcome for Terminators. With the weapons, we see a lot of special rules: devastating wounds, blast, ignore cover, rapid fire 2. All of these seem very universal special rules, which are coming back, and I think in a lot of ways that will be beneficial. I always thought universal special rules were a great idea. We all still refer to things as feel no pain, as deep strike. I once had a comment of someone saying, "Oh no, stop referring it to feel no pain, it's a different rule." It worked in that way, it was proxy wording, and going back to universal special rule means not every army needs to have a specific wording of the same effect. We know what the effect is and how much it needs to roll. So hopefully with having these universal special rules, it will keep us on the right track to know exactly what this weapon does. No mention of heavy weapons or assault weapons, I could be wrong in that. Interesting, I'm very intrigued to see how that evolves. Something that was in the previous editions where we had all these different ways to fire, well not ways to fire, but the weapon characteristics specific and ranged. That's going to be something to look out for, but again we are just getting the first initial drips of what the datasheets and rules will be. AP reduction, so assault cannon and power weapons are reduced in AP. As I said, it's been mentioned that armor penetration has been reduced. Nothing in here is over AP -2, and in a lot of ways I think that's a good thing. AP was getting a little bit ridiculous at points, and it could get to ridiculous lengths with extra bonuses on top of them. So I think that is a good thing. However, having looked at the example of the Power Fist versus the Power Weapon, the sort of advantage of Power Fist being Strength 8 and 2 damage versus the Power Weapon, which is only an extra attack, leads me to think there's just way too many benefits on the Power Fist in and itself. Points could play an effect in there, but it's just very intriguing to see that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and especially with Power Fist now hitting on Weapon Skill 3, that is, yeah, it's just very, very interesting to see how that plays out. Special rules, we've got Oath of the Moment. This seems to be the faction rule, possibly replacing Legion rules, and I think that is what they're going for going forward. Now, I don't know how I feel about this because I really like the individual faction rules. It seemed that the rules that were geared towards how that faction played lore-wise. Now, the problem with it I had in game is that sometimes one faction could clearly be better than other ones, and there'd be a tier list of which one would do better. Maybe situationally, some would do better, which is fine. But I suppose where it might be quite beneficial is that it doesn't really matter what colour scheme that you do paint your Legion. You paint the Legion how you like, and then these faction rules can be applied to just about any of them. So that could be quite nice in a way. I feel it's maybe removing parts of the flavour, but again, we don't know too much about it at the moment. But still, I'm just about worried that it may be removing that sort of individual feel for playing Imperial Fists versus Ultramarines. Now it could just be Space Marines, Oath of Moment. We'll see how that comes out later on. We then also teleport Homer and Fury of the First. We'll look at teleport Homer later because that's got a bit of a stratagem on it, but essentially that works in tandem with the teleport Homer, but they do have Deep Strike. I imagine that's going to work in a very similar way as it does now, but it's not entirely specified. But the Oath of the Moment, along with the Fury of the First has a great extra ability to really make Terminators quite scary, and then going in tandem with the Oath of the Moment, very, very cool. The only thing I would say is that it seems that Fury of the First really, really does well with this Oath of Moment. So if there's different faction rules, it could be that some faction rules may work with Phobos Armor really well, some might work with Intercessors really well, some with Terminators. So it might lead that if you decide to go with an Oath of Moment army where Fury of the First is a real good benefit, you might want to play a very Terminator heavy army. And it might lead to less variety in your force. That's only the feeling I'm getting on that one, and it could be the case of Oath of the Moment is what Space Marines get in general. There's a bit of assumptions on that one I'm going by. But overall, really, really solid stuff we're seeing here. I think it's a good cleanup. If this is simply what you get in a data card, it keeps the rules right, it keeps them simple, and I really like the idea of cards just having the ones that you select for the units that you play, and then you can easily refer to them. I think that's quite good, and if they're as clean as this, I'll be quite delighted. On to specific weapon abilities, and this again brings in the idea of universal special rules, starting off with Rapid Fire. Now, Rapid Fire was kind of a universal special rule already. It was a type of weapon type, and we all knew that, you know, if you were within half range, you get to fire double the amount of shots that you had in your stats. Now it seems to have changed slightly because it says you increase by the amount denoted by X, which kind of, I believe, works a little bit like the Orc Daka rule. I could be wrong in that, where they had sort of their single shot firing and then they had their secondary stat, which sometimes could be a little bit more than the actual double amount of shots. So slightly different in a way, but interesting nonetheless. And with Terminators, looking at the initial rules here, it might be a slight, you know, reduction for them because they used to be able to rapid fire no matter what the range was because of their heavy armor. Maybe they will get that going forward, maybe they won't, but simply put, maybe a bit more of a reduction for them, but it's still very, very cool, very, very one of those things that we've seen in the past and makes sense. It's rapid fire how we've loved it for many, many, many years. Next up, that's very interesting, is the anti-weapons, and I'm very intrigued by that. It seems to work a little bit like poison to a degree. it works that an unmodified wound roll of X scores a critical wound, which in essence, by the looks of it, is just the unmodified wound roll you would need a minimum to score a wound against a particular unit with a particular keyword. So in the case of the Chain Fist, that works out quite well because some of the vehicles may be going up to toughness 12. Now for Power Fist, that requires 5s to wound if they are going to be strength 8, versus a Chain Fist would need 3s to wound, and that can be quite a benefit. I feel it's a bit of an odd wording. Why call it critical wound? Why, just minimum wound would have done. Critical makes it sound like you're going to get extra damage on top of it. And who knows, you might. There might be something more to critical wound. But from the sounds of it, it just looks like it's the minimum of what you need to wound. So you can see the benefit between Power Fist and Chain Fist. Chain Fist may be -1 to hit in essence, but you also have a minimum to wound if you were to come against a vehicle. And if those vehicles are going up to toughness 12, you can bet that 3+ might actually be a really good shout. And on to other rules of note, particularly we get our first look at stratagems, kind of how they're laid out. I don't think we've seen this before, and I really like it. The breakdown of when target effect restrictions really makes it more clear. Rather than having big blocks of text, it really just brings everything down to bullet points, which is so much easier to understand. You have the when target effect restrictions, really, really good. Look forward to seeing many more stratagems laid out this way. Looking at rapid ingress in particular, what an interesting stratagem. So you essentially are able to bring in a unit from reserve in your opponent's movement phase. Now that gives your opponent a chance possibly to shoot or charge that unit, really be able for them to get a chance to try and counter it before your next turn, which I would guess you'd be able to move, shoot and charge, which could be really, really dangerous. So I can see a lot more positives of this stratagem, how it can be a real benefit. One thing to mention as well, I believe you actually have to put this Homer beacon down if you use the Homer beacon for the Terminators, then that's another thing that your opponent has to think about, because psychological aspects. You put down that homing beacon and your opponent has to think, well, those Terminators might come in that area. Have I got to work around it? That could be quite interesting. We also saw Blast still appears to be here, though not exactly sure what might have changed. They've not gone into it in particular. There was Torrent, not specified, but I think a few people mentioned that is likely to be what's going to count as auto hits. And Ignore Cover, good to see it return to Flamers, though it was really weird that some of them didn't have that. It was a staple for a while. Flaming attacks, yeah, Ignore and Cover, quite good. Overall, I think this is a good start to how stratagems are laid out. I look forward to seeing many of them being developed this way and what they look like. Could this be the turn of the sentiment of stratagems when they are this exact, less of them, and we're just easier to run with them? Very, very intrigued to see what people think. And that is it for discussing the Terminators rule reveals. Just first sort of look at them. Was there anything I missed, anything got wrong? Please leave me comments and let me know. One thing I might have missed is that I think the power weapon was just denoted as power weapon, not power sword. So what does that say when it comes to maybe power axes or power staves? Might be interested to see if power axes and power swords just become one thing. Honestly, I could get behind that. I think that could be quite good. And yeah, I'm just very intrigued to see what people think. Again, we don't have the full idea of what the rules 10th edition is going to bring. This is all very much just sort of first impressions, what's our thoughts. We don't have the context behind it, but are we excited? Please let me know in the comments. Please share, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on another Tabletop Assault Battle Report.